Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jennifer.
And I'm Zach, and we're from Cumberland Adult Network for Upgrading, or CANU, located in Amherst, Nova Scotia. We're here this afternoon to explain how the new E3 framework will work easily into your pre-existing activities and lessons. We will demonstrate this by walking you through a lesson, and then showing you how the new E3 competencies are embedded in that lesson.
The lesson that we will be walking you through today is a lesson on fractions. As a facilitator, how many times have you heard the phrases, "Ugh, I don't like fractions," or "Oh, we're never going to use them"? Raise your hand if you've heard those things. I'm just an avatar. I can't really see you or your hands raised, but I'm sure there are many raised. Thank you for participating. Prior to this lesson, we would have already covered the topics of adding fractions, multiplying fractions, and simplifying fractions. This would be the perfect opportunity to bring in a cooking lesson to show that yes, indeed we do use fractions on a daily basis. As a group, we would read over the entire recipe, we would closely examine the ingredients required, and we would read through the steps of the recipe. At this point, we would discuss how it would be economical to double this recipe to feed your family more than one meal. We would discuss the ways that we could double our fractions to in turn double the recipe. We could add the two fractions together. We could multiply the fraction by 2. Do we need to simplify our fraction when we're done? We would make the changes to our recipe so that we could double the amount. At this time, we would also discuss budgeting. How could we make this recipe for possibly a little bit cheaper? We could discuss looking through flyers. Does Superstore or Walmart have pineapple on sale this week? Does somebody have chicken on sale this week? We would discuss also cost-effective substitutions. For example, in the recipe, it calls for broth. What could we use instead of broth that might be a little bit cheaper? Well, we could use water. What else could we use in place of fresh vegetables? We could use frozen. From there, we would then put our knowledge into practice and get cooking.
Now that we've given you an overview of a lesson, we're going to show you how the new E3 competencies are woven into that lesson. We will illustrate this by using 3 of the E3 competencies. We're going to be using the following chart to also demonstrate how the old essential skills that we used previously compare to the new competencies. The first E3 competency that we will be discussing is understand and use numbers. This can be broken down into sub-competencies and abilities: manage money, uses measures. We demonstrated this in the lesson, first off with the fractions. We had students stating that they would never use fractions, but then we made it relatable for everyday life. We compared fractions and talked about them. Which is bigger or smaller, a quarter or a half? Finally, we doubled the recipe and discussed how would we do that successfully. The next topic that we discussed in this lesson was budgeting, and we used tasks like using flyers to plan out meals based on what is for sale that week. We planned meals ahead of time so we wouldn't have to go to the grocery store 1 or 2 or even 3 times. We talked about what we could substitute in the recipe to save money: water versus broth, fresh veggies versus frozen veggies. We discussed the use what you have concept, where we create meals based on what's in your cupboard and substitute ingredients in the recipe. And finally, we discussed methods of cooking that allow you to feed your family more than one time. All these components of the lesson now fall under the E3 competency, understand and use numbers. Previously, we would have used the language under the 9 essential skills of numeracy.
The second U3 competency that is embedded in this lesson would be find and use information. Would also fall under the sub-competency and abilities of read continuous text and interpret documents. In this lesson, reading continuous text would be the learners reading the recipe. The learners will practice how to read a recipe from beginning to end before starting their cooking. The learners would interpret documents by reading the recipe to determine what ingredients are required. Do they have them, or will they be required to look for possible substitutions? The learners will also follow the recipe in the steps provided. Previously, this would have fallen under the essential skills reading and document use. But now, as previously stated, this would fall under the E3 competency find, and use information.
The third and final E3 competency that we'll be discussing is engaging with others. The sub-competencies and abilities that were demonstrated in this lesson were adaptability and teamwork. They were performed when learners learned how to substitute ingredients in the recipe. This helps with cost efficiency as well as availability of ingredients. Learners also demonstrated teamwork because they worked together to create this recipe and even shared it as a group when they were done cooking it. Previously, these tasks would have fallen under the 9 essential skills as working with others. E3 reframes it to fall under engaging with others.
Now for the assessment piece of this lesson. As an instructor, I would assess this lesson through observation. For example, were the learners able to follow the recipe? Were they able to come up with the proper fraction amounts when doubling? Were the learners able to apply the concept of substitutions? Were they able to work with others to create this culinary masterpiece? If a mistake was made, was the learner able to recognize it and attempt to fix it? For example, did they use 1 1/4 cup of vinegar instead of a 1/4 cup? Haha, oops.
It may be new terminology, but as you can clearly see, the E3 competencies are already incorporated into the lessons you currently teach.
High five, Zach, we're done.
I think we did a great job.
Now to hand it over to the real Zach and Jennifer for questions. Thanks for watching our presentation.
Bye.